I recently lived through my own worst nightmare. The HOA president sicked an entire SWAT team on us, all because my wife refused to flash some ID. Her excuse? She called it a routine new resident drill. Funny thing is, the only thing it drilled that day was her own humiliation when the team saluted my wife with respect. Let me start from the beginning. The knock came at 7 o'clock in the morning. It was a hard, flat thud against our front door, the kind of knock that means business you don't want. It was our third day in Oak Valley, our supposed slice of peaceful heaven after I'd cashed out of my high-stress tech job. 3 days. We hadn't even fully unpacked. My wife, Chloe, was still in her silk robe, sipping coffee on the porch swing, looking out at the lake. She was the picture of calm. I was the opposite. My nerves were already shot from a decade of deadlines and caffeine, and that knock felt like a gunshot in the quiet morning air. I stood up from my own chair, ready to give whoever it was a piece of my mind for disrupting the one thing we'd paid a premium for, tranquility. But Chloe put a hand on my arm, a gentle pressure that said, "Let me handle this." She was always the cool one. Standing on our brand new welcome mat was a woman who looked like she gargled with bleach and lemon juice for fun. She had a haircut you could use as a straight edge and a pantsuit so sharp it could cut glass. Her face was pinched into a permanent state of disapproval. Behind her, a much larger man with a face like a grumpy bulldog stood with his arms crossed. He looked like her personal enforcer. "I'm Brenda," the woman announced, her voice a low snarl that didn't match the sunny morning. "HOA president. And this," she thumbed toward the bulldog, "is my husband, Walter. We need to see your identification for security purposes." I felt my blood pressure spike. Security purposes? At 7 o'clock in the morning? I opened my mouth to say something I would have definitely regretted, but Chloe was already moving. She stepped in front of me, her robe flowing around her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "No," Chloe said. The word was simple, flat, and final. It hung in the air like a stone wall. Brenda's painted-on eyebrows shot up toward her severe hairline. "Excuse me," she sputtered, as if Chloe had just spoken in a foreign language. "This is a mandatory security check for all new residents. If you refuse to comply, there will be consequences." Walter, the husband, took a step forward, trying to use his size to intimidate. It didn't work. Chloe didn't even glance at him. Her eyes were locked on Brenda. "You're on our property," Chloe stated, her voice still impossibly calm. "You don't have the authority to demand our identification. You can leave now." I could see a vein throbbing in Brenda's temple. She was not used to the word no. She looked from Chloe's calm face to my simmering one, and a nasty little smile played on her lips. She thought she had us figured out. She thought Chloe was just some soft housewife, and I was the hothead she could easily provoke and then crush with her rule book. "You'll regret this," Brenda hissed, pulling out her phone and stabbing at the screen with a blood-red fingernail. She turned and marched off our porch, Walter lumbering behind her like a loyal beast. She was snarling into her phone, spitting words like uncooperative, hostile, and potential threat. Dispatch later told us Brenda had reported automatic gunfire and an infant screaming, a code-red hostage scenario that automatically triggers the county's joint SWAT protocol. I turned to Chloe, my hands clenched into fists. What was that all about? Who does she think she is? Chloe just took another sip of her coffee. "Someone who's about to overplay her hand," she said, her eyes fixed on the street. I didn't have to wait long to find out what she meant. Less than 5 minutes later, the sound of screeching tires tore through the neighborhood. 3 black SUVs, the kind you see in movies right before a big raid, swarmed our quiet cul-de-sac. They screeched to a halt, forming a semicircle around our house, blocking any escape. Doors flew open and a dozen men in full SWAT gear poured out, weapons raised. They moved with silent, terrifying efficiency, their black helmets and body armor making them look like giant, angry insects. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was insane. This was a quiet lakeside community, not a war zone. Neighbors' curtains were twitching. I saw faces peeking out, a mix of fear and morbid curiosity. The team leader, a broad-shouldered man with a grim expression, pointed his rifle right at Chloe. She hadn't moved from the porch. She just stood there holding her coffee mug, her silk robe gently blowing in the breeze. She looked completely unfazed. "On your knees. Hands where I can see them," the team leader barked. I started to move, to shout, to do something stupid, but Chloe's voice cut through the tension again, sharp and clear. "Stand down, Captain Evans." The team leader froze. His whole body went rigid. He stared at Chloe, his eyes widening in disbelief behind his tactical goggles. He slowly lowered his weapon. "Ma'am?" he whispered, his voice cracking with shock. Chloe just smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Level 7 clearance," she said, her voice carrying easily in the now silent morning. "Protocol Omega. You know what to do." Captain Evans's face went pale. He snapped to attention so fast I thought he might give himself whiplash. He turned to his stunned team. "Stand down. I repeat, stand down. Form a perimeter. Secure the area. We have a code 10 situation." His voice was filled with a new kind of urgency, a kind of panicked reverence. The SWAT team, who moments ago had been ready to storm our house, now looked like a bunch of scolded schoolboys. They lowered their weapons and started moving away from the house, forming a protective circle facing outwards, towards the gawking neighbors. Brenda and Walter had been watching from their own manicured lawn across the street, their faces alight with smug satisfaction. But now that satisfaction had melted away, replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. Brenda's mouth was hanging open, her face as white as a sheet. The SWAT captain, Evans, walked stiffly up our porch steps. He stopped a respectful distance from Chloe and gave a sharp, formal salute. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. We received an anonymous tip about a hostage situation. We had no idea it was you. Your file is sealed, but your presence here wasn't flagged." Chloe nodded. "It's a quiet posting, Captain. I prefer it that way. Thank you for your rapid response. You and your men can stand down completely now. The threat has been identified." She glanced over his shoulder, her eyes landing directly on Brenda. The venom in that look could have curdled milk. Brenda flinched as if she'd been physically struck. She had tried to use a sledgehammer to swat a fly and had ended up bringing the full weight of the federal government down on her own head. Humiliation radiated from her in waves. As Captain Evans and his team packed up and drove away, leaving a stunned silence in their wake, I saw a new look in Brenda's eyes. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was hatred. She had been publicly embarrassed by the very power she tried to wield. I looked at my wife, the woman I thought I knew, standing there in her robe like a queen who had just dismissed her royal guard. I realized this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Brenda's little HOA kingdom had just declared war, and she had no idea who she was really fighting. We didn't move to Oak Valley looking for a fight. It was the exact opposite. We moved there looking for peace. My life for the last 10 years had been a blur of 16-hour workdays, venture capital meetings, and the constant, grinding pressure of a tech startup I'd built from the ground up. I was successful, sure. I had the money to prove it. But I was also running on fumes, my temper getting shorter and the bags under my eyes getting bigger. One day, I just hit a wall. I came home, threw my keys on the counter, and told Chloe, "I'm done. I'm selling everything. I just want to go somewhere quiet and learn how to breathe again." She didn't argue. She just looked at me with those calm, perceptive eyes of hers and nodded. "Okay," she said. "Where do you want to go?" We found Oak Valley in a glossy magazine, a planned community nestled around a sparkling lake, full of happy families, pristine lawns, and promises of community potlucks. It looked like a postcard from a simpler time. For me, it was perfect. For Chloe, I wasn't so sure. My wife is a woman of quiet mysteries. When I met her, she told me she was in security consulting. It was vague, but I didn't push it. I knew she'd been in law enforcement before that, something elite. She told me it was SWAT, and I believed her. She could handle herself, that was obvious. She had a confidence that was almost unnerving, a way of moving and observing the world that told you she missed nothing. She was methodical, analyzing every situation before she acted. She was also fiercely protective, but she was world-weary, too. I could see it in her eyes sometimes, a shadow of things she'd seen and done that she never spoke about. She agreed to the move to Oak Valley, I think, mostly for me. She saw I was breaking, and she was willing to trade whatever life she had before for a quiet one with me. I didn't know the full extent of what she was giving up. I just knew I was grateful. So, we bought the big house with the lake view, packed up our lives, and prepared to be boring. We were going to fish and garden, and maybe I'd finally write that novel I always talked about. Our first couple of days were blissful. We unpacked boxes, watched the sunset from our new porch, and breathed air that didn't smell like exhaust fumes. I started to feel the tension in my shoulders ease for the first time in years. We met a few of the neighbors. One of them, a squirrely, nervous little guy named Polly, lived 2 doors down. He brought over a plate of what he called welcome brownies, which were suspiciously flat and crunchy. "You'll like it here," he'd said, his eyes darting around as if he expected someone to jump out from behind a bush. "It's nice, mostly. Just to stay on Brenda's good side." He'd said it with a nervous little laugh, but there was real fear in his eyes. "Brenda?" I'd asked. "Oh, you know, Brenda," he'd said, as if that explained everything. "HOA president. She runs a tight ship. A very, very tight ship." He'd practically scampered back to his own house after that, leaving me and Chloe with the crunchy brownies and a sense of unease. We found out what Polly meant on day 3. After the whole SWAT team incident, the story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. But the version that spread was Brenda's version. She spun a tale of heroic vigilance, of how she'd identified a potential danger and had the courage to act. She painted us as suspicious outsiders, hostile and secretive. She conveniently left out the part where the SWAT captain saluted my wife. In her telling, the team left because we were cleared after a tense standoff, but we were now on notice. It was brilliant in a sick, twisted way. She was turning her own epic failure into a weapon against us. And the neighborhood, cowed by years of her petty tyranny, bought it. Or at least they pretended to. People who had smiled and waved the day before now averted their eyes when we drove by. The friendly atmosphere we'd paid for vanished overnight. I was furious. My first instinct was to march right over to Brenda's house and give her a piece of my mind. I was a fighter. In the business world, I was aggressive. I was relentless. I didn't let people push me around. I wanted to tear down her perfectly manicured rose bushes and tell her exactly what I thought of her and her sham of a kingdom. But Chloe, as always, was the voice of reason. "Don't," she said, stopping me as I paced a trench into our new living room carpet. "That's what she wants. She wants you to lose your temper. She wants you to be the aggressive, unstable new guy she's telling everyone you are. Don't give her the satisfaction. So, we're just going to sit here and take it?" I demanded. "She called a SWAT team on us, Chloe." "For what? Because you wouldn't show her your driver's license?" "No," she said, her eyes glinting with a hard light I hadn't seen in a long time. "We're not going to take it. We're going to let her dig her own grave. People like her, people drunk on that tiny bit of power, they always make mistakes. They get sloppy. They get arrogant. And when she does, we'll be ready." She had that look on her face, that methodical, analytical expression. It was like she was breaking down a tactical problem, identifying weaknesses, planning her attack. I was starting to realize that security consultant was the understatement of the century. I didn't know who this woman, this legend the tactical world saluted, really was. I didn't know what level 7 clearance truly meant. All I knew was that our dream of a quiet life was dead. We were in a war now, whether we wanted it or not. Brenda had just fired the first shots, and I was beginning to suspect that my wife was about to fire back with something a whole lot bigger. Brenda didn't waste any time. The day after the SWAT team fiasco, the first official-looking envelope from the Oak Valley Homeowners Association appeared in our mailbox. It was thick and heavy, like it was full of bad news. It was. Inside, printed on expensive cream-colored paper, was a list of violations. Our trash cans, it claimed, were visible from the street for 3 hours longer than the bylaws allowed. Fine, $100. There was a weed, a single solitary dandelion, spotted near our driveway. Fine, $50. The color of our welcome mat was apparently not on the pre-approved list of earth tones. Fine, another $100. It was absurd. It was a declaration of war written in the language of petty tyrants. I crumpled the letter in my fist, the paper crackling in protest. $250 for a weed and a welcome mat? Is she insane? I raged, pacing the kitchen. Chloe took the crumpled ball of paper from my hand and smoothed it out on the counter. She read each line item with a calm, focused intensity. "It's not about the money, Leo," she said softly. "It's about harassment. It's a classic escalation tactic. She's trying to establish a pattern of noncompliance. She's building a case against us." She was right, of course. The fines were just the beginning. The next phase of Brenda's attack was a campaign of whispers and lies. She started holding little coffee meetings with the other wives in the neighborhood, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur as she spread her poison. We were dangerous, she'd say. We were secretive. Why would a SWAT team respond to a simple wellness check unless there was something to hide? We had federal connections, she'd hint, but not the good kind. Maybe we were in witness protection. Maybe we were criminals ourselves. The gossip slithered through the manicured lawns and pristine houses of Oak Valley, turning our dream home into a fishbowl. We felt eyes on us everywhere we went. At the community pool, mothers would snatch their children away when we walked by. At the little market in the center of the community, people would suddenly find something fascinating to look at on the floor when we entered their aisle. It was isolating. It was infuriating. Our neighbor Polly became our only source of information. He'd scurry over to our house after dark, moving from shadow to shadow like a spy in a bad movie. She's telling everyone you're part of a secret government program that went rogue, he whispered one night, nervously chewing on a fingernail. She said your wife has some kind of mind control powers. I think Susan from number 12 actually believes her. Mind control powers? I said, rubbing my temples. Polly, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You don't know Brenda, he squeaked. She can make people believe anything. Last year, she convinced half the neighborhood that squirrels were government drones sent to spy on us. People were putting tin foil on their bird feeders. Despite the absurdity, Polly's intel was crucial. It showed us just how unhinged Brenda was and how much control she had over this community. She wasn't just a bully. She was a cult leader in a tracksuit. The climax of her initial assault came 2 weeks after the first letter. We received another official envelope. This one was even thicker. Inside was a formal notice. The HOA board, at an emergency session, had scheduled a vote. The single item on the agenda was the proposed expulsion of my wife and me from the Oak Valley community. It cited a long list of our supposed transgressions, the initial refusal to provide ID, the series of unpaid fines. We'd paid them immediately with checks that Chloe meticulously documented and sent via certified mail, and a catch-all clause about behavior unbecoming of a resident and detrimental to the peace and harmony of the community. It was a sham, a kangaroo court where she was the judge, jury, and executioner. This was it. This was her endgame. She wasn't just trying to fine us into submission. She wanted us gone. She wanted to purge us from her perfect little kingdom. That was the last straw for me. All my carefully contained rage, all the frustration I'd been swallowing at Chloe's request, it all boiled over. That's it, I roared, slamming the notice down on the table. I'm done playing her game. I'm calling a lawyer. I'm calling the press. I'm going to sue her and this entire sham of an HOA into the ground. Chloe watched me, her expression unreadable. She let me rant and rave for a full 5 minutes. She let me get all the fire and fury out of my system. When I was finally done, breathing heavily and glaring at the offending piece of paper, she spoke. A lawsuit will take years, Leo. The press won't care about a petty HOA dispute. By the time it's over, we'll be broke, exhausted, and we'll still have to live here, or we'll have been forced out. Her way is slow and public. Our way needs to be fast and quiet. Our way? What is our way? I asked, my anger giving way to a weary curiosity. We're past the point of letting her make mistakes, Chloe said, her eyes turning cold and hard. She's made her move. Now we make ours. She wants to play in the dark? Fine. We'll play in the dark. She walked over to the window and looked out at Brenda's perfectly lit house across the street. A smug silhouette moved past one of the windows. She thinks she's a predator, Chloe murmured, almost to herself. She's about to find out what it's like to be prey. A chill went down my spine. This was a side of my wife I had never seen before. The quiet, gentle woman I loved was gone. In her place was a strategist, a hunter. The battle for Oak Valley was about to enter a new, far more dangerous phase. And I had a feeling Brenda was about to learn that some welcome mats should never be stepped on. The pressure didn't let up. It got worse, more personal. Brenda and her bulldog husband, Walter, seemed to be working in shifts to make our lives miserable. One morning, we woke up to find our mailbox hanging open, the previous day's mail torn to shreds and scattered across our lawn. It was a petty, juvenile act, but it was also a federal offense. We reported it, but with no proof of who did it, the report went nowhere. A few days later, a baseball came crashing through our living room window. When I ran outside, I saw a group of teenagers scrambling away, but lingering on the sidewalk across the street was Walter, a smirk on his face. He just shrugged when he saw me, a gesture of mock innocence that was more infuriating than an open admission of guilt. He'd put the kids up to it. I was sure of it. He was using proxies, keeping his own hands clean. I was on a razor's edge. Every little thing set me off. My dream of a peaceful, quiet life had become a waking nightmare of paranoia and anger. I started double-checking the locks at night. I found myself glaring at every neighbor, wondering if they were one of Brenda's spies. The fiery, hot-headed part of me that I had tried so hard to bury was roaring back to life. I wanted to smash things. I wanted to confront Walter at the community pool, where he held court like a sunburnt king, and wipe that smug look off his face. I was losing the battle for my own peace of mind, and that was almost worse than the war with Brenda. Through it all, Chloe was an island of calm in my storm. While I was raging, she was preparing. She didn't get angry. She got to work. She documented everything with the precision of a crime scene investigator. She took pictures of the shredded mail. She carefully collected the baseball and bagged it as evidence. She kept a detailed log of every incident, every sideways glance, every whispered comment we overheard. She also started making phone calls, quiet, discreet calls made from the soundproofed office we'd built for my post-burnout writing career. I'd walk by and hear her voice, low and steady, speaking in a language of codes and acronyms I didn't understand. She was calling in favors, activating a network I never knew she had. One afternoon, a nondescript panel van pulled into our driveway. A man in a plain gray uniform got out, did a full sweep of our house for listening devices, and installed a state-of-the-art security system with cameras so small you'd never find them unless you knew exactly where to look. He worked for 3 hours, never said more than 10 words to me, and when he was done, he just nodded at Chloe and left. The bill never came. Who was that? I asked her later. An old colleague, she said, her eyes scanning the new camera feeds on her tablet. He owed me a favor. The tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. We were living under siege. We knew Brenda and Walter were planning something for the big expulsion meeting. They were building their case, manufacturing evidence, and poisoning the well. Our neighbor Polly, our reluctant spy, was a nervous wreck. He'd leave cryptic notes in our mailbox written on scraps of paper. Walter met with a city councilman today. Brenda is telling people you're planning to build a gun range in your basement. They're measuring the height of your grass at night. It was a slow, grinding psychological war, and they were winning. They were turning our sanctuary into a prison. I felt helpless. My skills, building businesses, negotiating deals, were useless here. This wasn't a boardroom. This was a back alley fight, and I didn't know the rules. Then one night, everything changed. It was just after 2 o'clock in the morning. I was asleep, but Chloe was awake. She was always awake, it seemed. I was woken by her hand on my shoulder. "Leo," she whispered, her voice tight. "Look." She handed me her tablet. On the screen was a live feed from one of the new security cameras, one positioned to look at our garage door. The image was crystal clear, even in the dead of night. A figure, dressed head to toe in black, was crouched by the garage, working at the lock with a crowbar. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was a break-in. The figure turned their head for a moment, looking over their shoulder, and the night vision camera caught their face perfectly. My jaw dropped. It was Brenda. Not her husband, not some hired thug. It was the HOA president herself, dressed like a cat burglar, trying to pry her way into our home. "I'm calling the cops," I hissed, shooting out of bed, adrenaline surging through me. "No," Chloe said, her voice like ice. She held up her phone. On the screen was a simple app with a single, unmarked red button. "The local police will just complicate things. She'll claim she saw a light on and was checking on us. They'll believe her. She's the HOA president. We need a different kind of response." She tapped the red button. "My address has sat on a level 7 rapid response grid since 2019. A DHS mobile team is always staged within a 5-mile ring for precisely this kind of breach." There was no sound, no confirmation screen, just a single, silent tap. She looked at me, her face grim in the glow of the tablet. "They'll be here in 4 minutes," she said. "Who's they?" I asked, my heart pounding. Before she could answer, the night outside our window lit up. But there were no sirens, no flashing red and blue lights, just the silent, swift arrival of two dark, unmarked sedans. They glided to a stop at the end of our driveway, and four figures in dark suits got out. They moved with the same silent, unnerving efficiency as the SWAT team, but these weren't cops. They looked like something else entirely. They cornered a stunned Brenda against our garage door before she even knew they were there. As they snapped a pair of cuffs on her wrists, my wife leaned over to me and whispered, "Department of Homeland Security." An evidence tech bagged her crowbar and the black jumpsuit, snapping photos before the agents hauled her away. You don't get to break into a Level 7 protected property without consequences. This wasn't just a game anymore. The stakes had just been raised to a level I couldn't even comprehend. Watching Brenda get cuffed by federal agents on my driveway was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Her face, caught in the cold, white beam of a flashlight, was a mask of pure disbelief and terror. The smug, entitled Queen of Oak Valley was reduced to a stammering, pathetic mess. "You can't do this," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "I'm the HOA president. I was securing the premises." The lead agent, a tall woman with a face carved from granite, didn't even blink. "You were attempting to gain entry to a federally protected private residence, ma'am," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "That's a felony. You have the right to remain silent." They bundled her into the back of one of the sedans, her black commando outfit looking ridiculous under the circumstances. The whole thing was over in less than 5 minutes. The unmarked cars melted back into the night, taking Brenda with them. The silence that fell afterward was deafening. We had won. The evil witch was gone. Or so I thought. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. The few neighbors who had been awake had seen it all. The story was everywhere. Brenda arrested by the feds. For a moment, it felt like a liberation. People were smiling at us again. Our neighbor Paulie actually walked up our driveway in broad daylight, a triumphant grin on his face. "You did it. You actually did it. She's gone," he crowed. The sense of victory lasted for about 24 hours. Then the real twist came. Brenda wasn't gone. She was out on bail. And her husband, Walter, was a lot more than just a grumpy bulldog. He was a city councilman with deep pockets and even deeper connections. The attempted break-in, which should have been the end of Brenda, was just the beginning of our real problems. Walter didn't just have influence in our little lakeside community. He had influence all over the city. The first sign that we'd kicked a much bigger hornet's nest was when the building inspector showed up. We'd filed for a permit to build a new deck on the back of our house. It should have been a rubber stamp approval. Instead, a grim-faced inspector spent 4 hours crawling all over our property with a clipboard and a magnifying glass. He hit us with a dozen bogus violations. The electrical outlets on the porch were 1/4 of an inch too low. The grade of our lawn was off by 2 degrees. The paint on our trim wasn't an approved shade of white. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, all orchestrated by Walter from his office at City Hall. Our simple deck permit was denied, and we were slapped with thousands of dollars in new fines, this time from the city itself. It didn't stop there. One afternoon, my car was towed from in front of our own house. I had to pay $500 to get it out of an impound lot on the other side of town. The reason? A new, emergency no parking sign had mysteriously appeared that morning and then disappeared right after my car was hooked up. It was a ghost violation, untraceable, undeniable. Walter was fighting a shadow war, using the bureaucracy of the city as his weapon. He was untouchable, hiding behind a wall of permits, ordinances, and plausible deniability. Brenda was no longer the main threat. She was just the rabid chihuahua. Walter was the pit bull, and he had been let off the leash. He was methodical, cruel, and he was using his legitimate power to destroy us in a way that was almost impossible to fight back against. I was at my wit's end. We were trapped. We couldn't sell the house, because who would buy a property that was clearly the target of a vindictive city councilman? We couldn't live in peace. We were being bled dry, financially and emotionally. The joy and relief we'd felt when Brenda was arrested had curdled into a cold, hard dread. We had poked the bear, and now the bear's much bigger, meaner friend was trying to tear our house down. That night, Chloe sat me down in the living room. The curtains were drawn. The happy, optimistic couple who had moved in a few weeks ago were gone. In their place were 2 soldiers in a trench, tired and wary. "We need to talk about what Level 7 means, Leo," she said, her voice low and serious. It's not just a fancy title. It's a protection detail for former deep-cover federal operatives involved in national security. I wasn't just SWAT. My work was sensitive. When I retired, they gave me this status as a shield. Some shield, I muttered bitterly, gesturing around the room. It just seems to have painted a bigger target on our backs. The protection has rules, she continued, ignoring my comment. It's reactive. It's designed to stop a direct physical threat, like Brenda trying to break in. It's not designed to fight a guy like Walter. It can't interfere with local politics or civil matters. If we use the system, we can file complaints. We can start a long, expensive legal battle against the city. It will take years, and we'll probably lose. Walter knows how to play that game. He'll bury us in paperwork and legal fees. She paused, her eyes locking with mine. Or, she said, her voice dropping even lower, we can fight him another way. My way. We stop playing defense. We stop reacting. We go on the attack. But if we do that, we'll be operating outside of the rules. We'll be on our own. It's a huge risk. The choice hung in the air between us, the moral crossroads. Do we trust the slow, broken system to maybe, eventually give us justice? Or do we take matters into our own hands? I looked at my wife, the ex-spy, the living weapon. I thought about Walter's smug face and Brenda's shrieking laughter. How far was I willing to go to defend my home, my wife, my life? The answer was terrifyingly simple. What's the plan? I asked. The decision was made. We were done playing by Walter's rules. We were going to fight back, not with lawyers and lawsuits, but with strategy and deception. My hot-headed anger finally had a purpose and had sharpened into a cold, devious resolve. Chloe's world-weary sigh was replaced by the focused energy of a predator. We were a team now, my devious mind and her tactical genius. The question was no longer if we would fight, but how. Walter's power comes from two things, Chloe explained, sketching on a whiteboard she'd set up in the office. His position as a city councilman and his money. We need to find out where the money comes from. A city councilman's salary isn't enough to afford his lifestyle or his level of influence. He's dirty. We just need to find the dirt. Our mission was simple, follow the money. But to do that, we needed bait. We needed something that would lure Walter out from behind his wall of bureaucracy. And that's where my old life came in handy. My plan was simple, but it was also incredibly risky. Before I burned out, I ran a tech company that specialized in logistical software for urban development. I still had contacts. I still had the lingo. And I still had the reputation. I would become Leo Martin, a different Leo Martin, a wealthy, slightly arrogant developer from out of state, looking to make a big investment in a town just like Oak Valley. And I would need a project, something big and juicy enough to get a greedy councilman's attention. We decided on a luxury condo development on the far side of the lake, a multi-million-dollar project that would require significant zoning changes and city permits. Exactly the kind of thing a corrupt councilman like Walter would want a piece of. But I couldn't just walk up to him. I needed an introduction. I needed a patsy. I needed our terrified, squirrely, gossip-loving neighbor. I needed Polly. Getting Polly on board was the hardest part. I cornered him one evening while he was pretending to inspect his prize-winning petunias. Polly, I said, keeping my voice low. We need your help. He looked like a deer in the headlights. Help? Me? No, I can't. Brenda would kill me. Walter would turn my lawn into a parking lot. They're trying to destroy us, Polly, I said, letting the desperation show in my voice. And if they can do it to us, they can do it to anyone. To you. All we need you to do is mention something to one of the neighborhood gossips. Let it get back to Walter naturally. I laid out the plan. Polly would overhear me on the phone in my front yard, talking loudly about a big land deal. He would hear me mention needing a local partner who knows how to get things done. He wouldn't have to do anything else, just plant the seed. He agonized for what felt like an eternity, his face pale with fear. Finally, with a shaky sigh, he agreed. Okay, he whispered. But if my petunias die, it's on your conscience. The bait was set. The next day, I put on one of my old, expensive suits, stood in my driveway, and had a very loud, very fake phone conversation about zoning variances and profit margins. Polly, bless his terrified heart, played his part perfectly. He was watering his plants and made a big show of accidentally hearing me. Within hours, the rumor was spreading through Oak Valley like a virus. A big developer was living right here in their midst. A big project was coming. Big money was on the table. It took less than a day for the fish to bite. Walter didn't call me directly, of course. He was too smart for that. Instead, I got a call from the head of the local chamber of commerce, a man I was sure was in Walter's pocket. He invited me to a welcome to the community lunch at the most expensive restaurant in town. Just the two of us. The trap was sprung. Chloe prepped me like I was an agent going behind enemy lines. I wore a wire, a tiny microphone disguised as a cufflink. She drilled me on my backstory, on the fake company, on the technical details of the fake development. Remember, she said, her eyes intense, he'll be testing you. He'll look for any sign that you're not who you say you are. Don't offer him anything. Let him be the one to bring it up. Let his greed do the work. I walked into that restaurant feeling a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. This was it. The moral crossroads was behind us. We were in the gray zone now, operating on our own terms. Walter was there waiting for me, a shark smile on his face. He was charming. He was slick. And he was every bit as corrupt as we suspected. He talked about the town, about its potential for growth. He talked about how difficult it could be for outsiders to get things done. How you needed a friend on the inside to cut through the red tape. I played the part of the slightly impatient, money-focused developer perfectly. I let him talk. I let him circle the bait. Finally, after an hour of verbal cat and mouse, he leaned in. A project of the scale you're discussing, he said, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. It would face obstacles. Environmental reviews, zoning hearings, they can take years. Unless, of course, you have a facilitator. Someone who can grease the wheels. And what does a facilitator like that cost? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Walter smiled, a flash of white teeth. Let's just say a 10% consulting fee, paid to a holding company I happen to be associated with, would make all those obstacles disappear. Bingo. It was on tape. The direct solicitation of a bribe. I felt a surge of triumph. We had him. We had him dead to rights. I shook his hand, smiled, and promised to have my lawyers draw up the paperwork. I walked out of that restaurant feeling 10 feet tall. I got in my car, my heart pounding with victory. I clicked the cufflink to turn off the recording. We had done it. We had beaten him. But as I pulled away from the curb, I had a sudden, chilling thought. It had been too easy. Walter was a careful man. Why would he expose himself so quickly to a total stranger? My triumphant feeling evaporated, replaced by a cold knot of dread in the pit of my stomach. Something was wrong. This wasn't the end of the game. It was just the beginning of a much more dangerous one. My victory lap lasted exactly as long as it took me to get home. I burst through the door, a triumphant grin on my face. I got him, Chloe. I got him on tape. He asked for a 10% bribe, clear as day. I held up the cufflink like it was a holy relic. Chloe took it from me, her expression uncharacteristically grim. She didn't look triumphant. She looked worried. She plugged the tiny device into her laptop, and we listened to the recording. It was perfect. Walter's oily voice, the talk of greasing the wheels, the explicit mention of a 10% fee to a holding company. It was an open and shut case of corruption. We send this to the DA, I said, pacing with excitement. We send it to the State Ethics Commission. He's finished. No, Chloe said, her eyes fixed on the screen, where she was already running a search on the name of the holding company Walter had mentioned. It's too clean, Leo. He's a city councilman. He's not stupid. He wouldn't risk his entire career on a verbal agreement with a man he just met. He was leading you. He wanted you to have this recording. My blood ran cold. What? Why would he want me to have proof that he's a crook? Chloe's fingers flew across the keyboard. She was pulling up public records, corporate filings, property deeds. A complex web of information began to form on the screen. Because this isn't about a 10% bribe on a condo deal, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. This is much, much bigger. He's using you, Leo. He's making you a part of something else. She finally found what she was looking for. A satellite map of the county appeared on the screen with a large parcel of land on the other side of the lake highlighted in red. It was the exact spot where I had proposed my fake development. But it was already owned by a single entity, the holding company Walter had told me to pay. And that company wasn't owned by Walter. The primary shareholder was a man named Preston Vance, a ruthless, infamous developer known for his hostile takeovers and his rumored connections to organized crime. Walter wasn't the mastermind, just Vance's junior bagman, paid to launder permits through City Hall for a tidy cut of every deal. The horrifying truth crashed down on me like a ton of bricks. We hadn't stumbled onto a simple case of a corrupt local official. We had walked right into the middle of a massive, multi-million-dollar land fraud scheme. Walter was just a puppet. Preston Vance was the one pulling the strings. Vance's company had been quietly buying up cheap, undeveloped land all around the lake for years, using a dozen different shell corporations to keep the prices down. Our house, our entire Oak Valley community, was sitting right in the middle of his planned mega-development. "They don't want to just force us out, Leo," Chloe said, her face pale. "They want to dissolve the entire HOA. They want to tear all of this down. Brenda's petty tyranny, Walter's bureaucratic war, it was all just a smokescreen. They were systematically harassing residents, devaluing the properties, and making life so miserable that people would be desperate to sell, and sell cheap, to Vance's anonymous buyers. The bribe wasn't for a permit, it was a test. If I had paid it, I would have become a co-conspirator. My development company would have been used to launder money or to force the final zoning changes. The recording I was so proud of wasn't a weapon against Walter, it was his insurance policy against me. If I ever turned on them, he would leak the tape and claim I was the one who tried to bribe him. We thought we were hunters, but we had been the prey all along. We were caught in a trap far more sophisticated and dangerous than we could have ever imagined. We weren't just fighting a petty HOA president and a corrupt councilman anymore. We were fighting a criminal empire. As the full weight of our situation settled in, the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, insistent buzz that made us both jump. Chloe's eyes darted to the security camera feed on her tablet. Two large men in expensive suits stood on our porch. They were not smiling. They did not look like they were selling cookies. "They know," Chloe whispered. "They know we know." My heart hammered against my ribs. My first instinct was to run, to hide. But Chloe was already moving. Her body language shifted. The worried wife disappeared, and the trained operative took over. She was calm, focused, deadly. "Stay behind me," she ordered. She walked to the door, her movements fluid and deliberate. She opened it. The two men on the porch were huge, their suits stretched tight across their broad shoulders. "Chloe," the one on the left asked. His voice was a low rumble. "Mr. Vance sends his regards. He understands there's been a misunderstanding about some local business matters. He'd like to strongly encourage you and your husband to reconsider your residency in Oak Valley. In fact, he's prepared to make you a very generous offer for your property. An offer you won't want to refuse." It wasn't an offer. It was a threat wrapped in a thin veneer of civility. The second man took a step forward, his hand reaching inside his jacket. It was a classic intimidation move, but he underestimated Chloe. In a blur of motion, too fast for me to properly follow, she moved. She grabbed the man's wrist, twisted it, and used his own momentum to slam him face first into the door frame. There was a sickening crunch as his nose broke. The first man stared in shock for a split second, long enough for Chloe to deliver a precise, disabling kick to his knee. He went down with a howl of pain. It was over in 3 seconds. Two of Preston Vance's professional thugs were writhing on my porch, neutralized with brutal, non-lethal efficiency. Chloe stood over them, not even breathing hard, her eyes like chips of ice. "Tell Mr. Vance," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "that we're not for sale. And tell him that the next people he sends to my door won't be walking away." The game had changed again. The threats were no longer veiled. The violence was no longer hidden. We had exposed their plan, and now they were done playing games. We were in a direct confrontation with a powerful, ruthless criminal, and we had just sent his messengers back to him, broken and bleeding. We had nowhere to run. Our only option was to fight, and I knew the final showdown was coming. There was no turning back now. We had declared war on Preston Vance, a man who crushed people for a living. The two thugs Chloe had dispatched from our porch were a clear message. The time for subtlety was over. Vance would retaliate, and it wouldn't be with HOA fines or bogus parking tickets. We were on our own, operating far outside the lines of Chloe's official protection. We had one advantage and one only, the evidence. We had the recording of Walter. We had the web of shell corporations connecting him to Vance. We had the land deeds. We had a clear picture of a massive criminal conspiracy. But evidence is useless if you're not alive to present it. Our new mission was simple: survive long enough to expose them. And we had to do it before the HOA expulsion meeting, which was now only 48 hours away. That meeting was their endgame, the final public execution to force us out and clear the way for Vance's project. It was also our only chance. We can't just go to the police, Chloe said as we fortified the house, checking locks and drawing blinds. Vance is too connected. For all we know, he owns the chief of police. We hand the evidence over to the wrong person, and it disappears, and so do we. We have to detonate it all at once, publicly. The plan she devised was audacious, reckless, and brilliant. It was my devious nature supercharged by her tactical mind. We would turn their show trial into our stage. We would use their own weapon, the HOA meeting, against them. The entire community would be there, a captive audience. Brenda and Walter would be there, smug and triumphant. And, Chloe wagered, a man like Vance wouldn't miss the chance to watch the final nail being hammered into our coffin. He'd be there, lurking in the back, savoring his victory. The next 36 hours were a blur of intense preparation. Chloe ran on 4-strength cold brew, catnapped in 5-minute bursts, and worked a 36-hour marathon that would make a ranger blush. While Chloe focused on physical security, I went to work on the information war. I spent hours locked in the office, using my tech skills to package our evidence into an explosive, easy-to-understand presentation. I created a timeline, charts showing the flow of money, maps illustrating the land grab. I compiled it all into a single file, a digital bomb ready to be deployed. Chloe, meanwhile, was making her own preparations. She called in one last favor, this time to a journalist she'd known from an old international incident, a reporter with a reputation for being fearless and incorruptible. Be at the Oak Valley Community Center tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, she'd said into the phone. I'm going to give you the biggest story of your career. We also needed one more thing. We needed a distraction. We needed our secret weapon. We needed Polly. This time, convincing him was even harder. Are you insane? He squeaked when we laid out the plan. You want me to stand up in the middle of the meeting and do what? We need you to cause a scene, Polly, I explained. Just as they're about to vote, argue about the new rules for lawn gnomes, complain about the color of the community center's drapes, anything. Just create a few seconds of chaos. That's all we need. He looked like he was about to have a heart attack. But then Chloe spoke, her voice firm but kind. Polly, these people are criminals. They are trying to steal your home from you, just like they're trying to steal ours. You can hide in your house and wait for them to bulldoze it, or you can fight back with us. This is your one chance to be brave. Something in her words got through to him. He straightened his shoulders, a look of terrified resolve on his face. Lawn gnomes, he said with a shaky nod. I can do that. The night of the meeting, the community center was packed. It felt less like an HOA meeting and more like a public execution. The air was thick with tension. Brenda and Walter sat at a long table at the front, looking like royalty presiding over their court. I scanned the crowd and, sure enough, standing near the back, trying to look inconspicuous in a golf shirt and slacks, was Preston Vance. He caught my eye and gave me a slow, predatory smile. It was a smile that said, "You're finished." The meeting began. Brenda went through the agenda with relish, her voice dripping with fake solemnity. She laid out the case against us, a litany of lies and half-truths. She painted us as monsters who had shattered the peace of her perfect community. Finally, she called for the vote. All in favor of expelling the residents of 112 Lakeside Drive. Hands shot up all over the room. It was almost unanimous. My heart sank. But just as Brenda was about to bring down the gavel, a reedy voice piped up from the middle of the room. Point of order, Madam President. It was Polly. He was on his feet, trembling, but his voice was surprisingly loud. I want to discuss Article 7, Section 4, regarding the unacceptable proliferation of non-regulation lawn gnomes. Chaos erupted. People started yelling, some laughing, some angry at the interruption. Brenda's face turned purple with rage. It was the distraction we needed. As all eyes turned to Polly's great gnome debate, Chloe, who had slipped out a side door, was letting her journalist friend in. At the same time, I walked calmly to the front of the room, pulled a small projector from my bag, and plugged it into the outlet for the presentation screen. Before Brenda could regain control, I hit a button on my laptop. The giant screen behind her lit up, not with HOA business, but with the title I had created, The Vance Conspiracy, How a criminal enterprise is stealing Oak Valley. An audible gasp went through the room. I started talking, my voice booming through the microphone I'd grabbed from the podium. I laid it all out. The bribes, the shell companies, the land grab. On the screen, the evidence flashed for everyone to see. Walter's face went white. Brenda looked like she was going to faint. Preston Vance, at the back of the room, stopped smiling, his face twisted into a mask of pure fury. He barked an order to two new thugs who were with him, and they started pushing their way through the horrified crowd towards me. But they never made it. Chloe stepped out of the shadows, blocking their path. The showdown was here, not with guns, but in front of the whole community. It was my words against their muscle, and my wife was standing between them. The two thugs Preston Vance sent for me were not the same ones Chloe had handled on our porch. These guys were bigger, meaner, and they looked like they did this for a living. The crowd gasped and shrank back, creating a clear circle around Chloe and the two advancing brutes. Vance was shouting from the back, "Get him! Stop that presentation!" But his voice was drowned out by the rising panic in the room. I kept talking, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me, clicking through the slides that laid their entire criminal enterprise bare. The names, the dates, the bank transfers. It was all up there in giant letters for every resident of Oak Valley to see. One of the thugs lunged at Chloe, trying to shove her aside. It was a clumsy, brutish move, and for Chloe, it was like the world slowed down. She sidestepped his charge with effortless grace, grabbed the arm he'd used to push, and used his own momentum to flip him over her shoulder. He landed on the ground with a loud, breath-stealing thud that echoed through the silent room. He didn't get up. The second thug hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes wide with disbelief. That was all the time Chloe needed. She moved in, not with a kick or a punch, but with a series of precise, lightning-fast strikes to the man's pressure points. His shoulder, his elbow, his neck. It wasn't a brawl, it was a surgical procedure. The giant of a man crumpled to the floor, his limbs suddenly refusing to obey his commands. He was conscious but completely disabled. Chloe hadn't thrown a single punch, but she had ended the fight in less than 5 seconds. She stood over them, calm and composed, as if she'd just finished a yoga routine. A collective awe fell over the crowd. They weren't looking at the crazy new neighbor anymore. They were looking at a warrior. At the front of the room, Brenda and Walter were frozen in horror, their faces illuminated by the damning evidence on the screen behind them. Their power, built on fear and whispers, had evaporated in an instant. Walter made a desperate move. He lunged for my laptop, trying to smash it to stop the flow of information. He never made it. A hand clamped down on his shoulder, stopping him cold. It was Captain Evans, the SWAT team leader, now in a sharp detective suit. Seconded to the state AG's anti-corruption task force, he had traded his tactical greens for a suit, but not his edge. And he wasn't alone. The side doors of the community center burst open, and uniformed officers flooded into the room. They weren't the local cops. Their uniforms were darker, their gear more serious. It was a state police tactical unit. Evans had been Chloe's real final call. She hadn't just invited a journalist. She had brought the cavalry. "Walter Sterling," Evans said, his voice ringing with authority, "you're under arrest for bribery, conspiracy, and racketeering." He snapped a pair of cuffs on Walter's wrists. 2 other officers did the same to a sputtering, hysterical Brenda. "You can't arrest me. I am the HOA," she shrieked as they led her away. Her words were pathetic, meaningless echoes of a reign that was officially over. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Evans and 2 of his largest officers walked to the back of the room and cornered a stunned Preston Vance. "Preston Vance," Evans announced, "you have a state warrant for your arrest, and I believe the FBI has a few questions for you as well." Vance, the untouchable titan of industry, the man who thought he owned the world, just stared at them, his mouth hanging open. The predatory smile was gone, replaced by the slack-jawed look of a man who had been completely and utterly outmaneuvered. The room erupted, not in chaos, but in a wave of relieved, cathartic cheers. Neighbors were hugging each other, crying with relief. Polly was being slapped on the back, hailed as the hero of the Great Gnome Rebellion. The journalist Chloe had called was furiously scribbling notes, her face alight with the thrill of the story of a lifetime. The police efficiently rounded up Vance, Walter, Brenda, and their cronies, leading them out in a perp walk in front of the flashing cameras of the news crews that had just arrived. In the middle of it all, I stood by the projector, my heart still pounding. Chloe walked over to me, her face calm. She took my hand. "It's over," she said. I looked at the wreckage of Brenda's little kingdom, at the faces of my neighbors, now free from the tyranny they had lived under for so long. I looked at my wife, this incredible, brilliant, dangerous, and wonderful woman. She was right. It was over. We had fought a war for our quiet little slice of heaven, and against all odds, we had won. The question of how far I would go to defend my own had been answered, as far as it takes. 6 months later, the lake is finally quiet because we made it that way. Vance's empire is evidence. Walter is booking 40 to life, and Brenda is serving a shorter stretch for fraud plus felony B&E. Her insanity plea flopped. Oak Valley rebooted. Sane HOA, new streetlights, zero matte color police. Polly, yes, long-gnome Polly, is treasurer and guards the budget like a jumpy dragon. My fines came back with interest. The deck went up in a day, and nobody measures our grass anymore. Chloe joins me on the porch swing, sets a warm muffin in my hand, and watches the water. I know the legend now, the operative who can erase cartels with a laptop and drop a thug without spilling her coffee. I also know the woman who traded all that for mornings like this. Peace wasn't granted here. We took it together. And if anyone comes knocking again, they'll remember what Oak Valley learned the hard way. Some welcome mats bite.